You're listening to ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio. This episode is brought to you by Maplytics by Inogic. Maplytics by Inogic is a market-leading certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geo-analytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualizations and routing capabilities within Dynamics CRM to better drive sales, improve business processes, and engage the right customers at the right time. We thank Maplytics by Inogic for sponsoring ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio. Well, Matthew, we got some feedback from last episode, and I heard from one of my clients who said that she really liked the episode we did about getting the most out of a conference as an attendee.
Ah, yes.
So that seems to be a good, timely topic for people.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
So let's flip that to the other side of the coin, which is, say, like me, you're going to be presenting at the Microsoft Ignite conference in a month. Mm-hmm. So you have a topic to get ready along with your job. What conferences coming up are you going to be speaking at?
So my speaking events are going to be more some regional and industry-specific events that I have coming up, which is actually a new challenge for me. I'm supporting an industry of healthcare, which is one that I don't have extensive background in, adding an additional wrinkle there.
Other than the birth of your children when you were at the hospital.
Yeah, exactly. But, all things considered, that went pretty smooth. So,
yeah. So you got extensive healthcare experience.
But yeah, of course, the traditional for us, things like CRM UG Summit and so forth.
Yeah, I guess the first thing, having done this for years, I think my first conference I spoke at was probably CRM UG Summit or something. I think I may have actually spoken about something at either a Scribe conference or something back in like 2008, 2009. And it's really nerve-wracking the first time you do it, especially if you're not in the practice of standing up in front of a room of 50 to 200 people.
Yeah.
But the first thing I would say is it gets easier as you do it. For one thing, you build up kind of a baseline of material that you can start from. You're not starting totally from scratch, unless you're crazy like me and sign up for something that you haven't really done before to motivate yourself to learn that thing.
Yeah,
then it's a little nerve-wracking.
That one is nerve-wracking. I encourage doing that same type of thing, but maybe not as your very first conference speaking opportunity. Pick something where that can not be in the back of your mind.
The great thing about user group is you can always buddy up with somebody too. So I am going to be presenting with one of my clients actually, and it's kind of her first time of presenting at a conference. So I'm doing it that way. It's less work for both of us, and you get a little bit. I think sometimes a conference session that has two people talking can be better than just one because you get different perspectives, and it's not as monotonous as just hearing me talk. You can hear somebody else talk too. Kind of play off of each other too.
Well, it makes me feel good about having a long future with ProdCast too. No, but
exactly.
To that point, there's a session that I've been part of at CRM UG Summit for several years, which occasionally we cycle people in and out of. It's the 50 tips in 50 minutes, and for some people that was the first kind of dip their toe in the water of being able to do that. So sometimes there are people who present a topic and they're looking for other kind of fresh perspectives to come help present it. So latching onto someone, even if you're not the person to spearhead it, but say, hey, I'd like to talk on that too. It's an area I'm excited about. Something like that. Good way to dip the toe in the water.
Right. So when you're doing a session, do you write it all out, or do you just do a bullet points? What do you do?
So, I'm gonna step back a little bit with kind of the selection of the topic in the first place. When I have a basic idea for a topic, I will try to solicit feedback from people without them knowing I'm trying to get feedback about this as a speaking topic. Just try to get the sense for, is it something that they have questions that come up, or they find interesting, or don't find it interesting, or there are other people who have either blogged or talked about that same type of thing. And what that does is it helps hone in on kind of a general sense of what it is that people might care about. And it's very, very easy for people to, provide that feedback. They don't think they're really doing anything. You're just having a conversation. From there, what I'll do is I'll try to write a description of the exact person, that audience member who would be the perfect person for me to deliver it to. What does that person do? What do they have experience with? What do they and don't they know? And I'm trying to be very specific about that. And then I write a one-liner thesis for what is that person going to learn coming out of this session. And the reason I go through all of this kind of up front is that I want to try to make the practice of actually developing the content of the presentation to be very targeted. It's really easy for me if I don't do that work up front. I end up coming up with way too many ideas. I'll get these, I'll start with bullet points and then kind of fill in content or specific screens or concepts that are stories that I want to cover. But I get way too much stuff if I kind of start with the content piece of it rather than starting with that person and that thesis. So that's kind of the early prep that I do as I'm doing it. I'm curious what you do.
Yeah, I do kind of a variant of that where I'll get several ideas and bounce them off of people. I always want to think, what are other people likely going to be talking about? Because I don't want to be the 50th guy who's talking about customer service cases, just generally best practices for customer service cases.
Yeah.
But if I want to speak in that area, I'll say what's a specific thing that I can put kind of my own spin on it. I like to do kind of a reverse positive, something like biggest mistakes and how to prevent them, or if not just the general topic, but something maybe that puts an interesting spin on it. One of the sessions that we're going to be doing on at CRMUG Summit is about contact management best practices, but it's not just that, it's the Avengers of contact management. So there's going to be superheroes involved. So putting a gimmicky spin on there might help.
Well, I mean, I'm definitely guilty of that same thing.
You're the Star Wars guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I threw the Star Wars references in there. I may be known to dress up as well for the for the right session. Actually, last year I had to go straight from presenting my Data Jedi session to a panel discussion, so I was the only person in Jedi regalia at the panel discussion.
But knowing your audience, both who are we targeting? That's a really good thing that a lot of people miss, where they have something, especially in a technical context. It's really easy to be all over the place. Are you talking to developers? Are you talking to administrators? Are you talking to users? Are you talking to business people? And a lot of times, you need to focus that in. However, I find within reason you can maybe combine two. Like if you have something that is of interest to both a business and a technical audience, having that together isn't bad. But, being clear, this is where we're going to get a little technical here. So those of you who aren't technical, we're going to have more like making sure that everybody who's there leaves with something of value.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think that's, for me, part of the, writing the description of that ideal individual. It's funny, you think of someone who's quote unquote in the business. Well, that person, whoever that ideal person is, when you look at an individual, there's always more dimensions to them than just, being a salesperson or being somebody in service operations, or it's, like that type of just title that's associated with it. They have a different background. Maybe you assume for that they have, some interest in the technical side, even if they're not, a tried and true developer. The fact that they have that interest, or that's who you're gearing this toward, when you flip that around on the audience side, it's easier as an audience member to recognize kind of when things get past that threshold of what you're personally comfortable with. But you can take that journey knowing, hey, this part went a little deep for me, but the rest of the stuff was great, and maybe that's something I go and investigate. And if you're just consistent in who you're kind of driving that content toward, it doesn't feel like a bait and switch kind of thing with a bunch of code content. If it was supposed to be for a person who's in a like an analyst role.
Right. And I think, too, the more sessions you attend, if you really pay attention to the ones you enjoy, gives you a good clue as well. Because if you don't go to any sessions and you just go to speak, you're not going to be tuned into kind of the nature of the conference. But if you've been at that conference before and you go to sessions, I really like that one. They had a lot of hands-on labs. I didn't get so much of that one. That was just a guy up there talking the whole time. Mm-hmm. That clues you in. Kind of like my philosophy with podcasts is I try to make a podcast that if I was a listener, I would like to listen to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're more successful at that than others, but but that's so the more experience you get that. So okay, you've got your idea, you've got it, you've got it approved. What's your next step? How do you prepare? How do you write it all out? Do you just do an outline?
Yeah. So typically what I'll do is I like starting with bullet points, and I literally use bullet points as though they are titles of slides that are going to be up in the session. I don't like to do the type of presentation that's purely reading off of a slide. I feel like for so many of those sessions, you have the typical title at the top of the slide and then a bunch of bullet points, or maybe it's formatted in a pretty way, but it's still effectively just bullet points going around there. I feel like that is the right direction for figuring out what it is that you're going to talk about, but there's a step further when you're actually applying that to what physically goes into the slide, and does it have to be like that speaker note reminder of what you're going to talk about, or can it literally be some sort of related content, something with an image, something with like a screenshot that's relevant to the conversation that you're having. And for me, when I build that out, for some of my decks, I end up, for the version that I post for participants to be able to download later, I'll actually take those kind of sub bullet points that I have in my outline, and I'll include them because the picture without some verbiage behind it is kind of meaningless without the presentation context if you don't have that. So it's a little bit different version of that deck that I'm assembling for someone who might consume it after the fact or go back and want to refer to it, versus when I deliver it in the first place. And I kind of plan the way I'm building the presentation with that in mind. Right.
I got, a few years ago, I got all inspired to be the minimalist PowerPoint guy that just had a big picture of a peach or something in the middle of it with no words at all. Yep. Something that was loosely related, which is effective in some cases. But I kind of got called down on that by a boss we used to have, you and I both had, mm-hmm. and saying, hey, we need something to hand out after the conference so they could follow it. What I like to do is kind of a compromise in the middle. Now I do see that having some content on there, but I think I'm a believer that you should stick to kind of like the Billboard rule, 7 words or less. Something maybe not that extreme, but the idea is so you don't want them just reading the PowerPoint and not focusing on you, but use the notes section, and that way, if you have to hand somebody a deck, you got more detail and links in the notes, so they can read it.
Yeah. Now, I think it's important to bring up at this point, as we're talking about actually crafting, the content and writing it out. I'm not the type of person who's going to write out paragraph form. Like I said, I do bullet points. I may have some specific things that I want to say in a particular way, and I'll have that as its own bullet, and I'll probably bold that and have it in quotes, so I know I want to say this specific thing in this way. And I'll try to memorize those if I have the bandwidth to do it. Sometimes I'm a little too close to the wire, and I don't have time to memorize that part of it.
Right.
But the rest of it, I'm trying to kind of use the opportunity of speaking with a live audience there, and I want to, not be, just reading something that they could have gone and read somewhere else. I want to be a little bit more responsive. I want to be focusing my attention out on the audience. So if it looks like people are understanding what I'm saying or not, or there's something they want more of, I can be kind of interacting with them, asking those questions and hitting on the things that the audience who's live and there and spent their time in my session, we can kind of dive into those topics, even if it's a little bit off script from what I had initially planned.
Yeah, I would agree, and I don't generally write my speeches out, but I would say it can be a helpful thing if you're just starting out speaking. And part of that is the classic rookie mistake when you have, say, a 45-minute presentation is you have too much content. And you get to 40 minutes in, and you still have half your presentation left.
Yeah.
And one helpful thing, and this is something I picked up from my days in Toastmasters, which I'm still a Toastmasters member, is by writing it out. If you can time yourself, like record yourself talking for a minute or two, and count the number of words per minute you do. One nice thing about writing a draft is knowing roughly how many words, how long, based on your normal conversation speech it'll take. Yep. That's a good thing to start, but you don't want to just be reading a written speech. I would then throw away the written speech or put it in an outline form, translate it to a PowerPoint deck. Sometimes having a prepared opening and closing can be helpful, especially if you want to end with impact. But yeah, you don't want to just read it out. But if you are nervous about that and want to see it, writing a draft could be helpful just to see roughly how much content you have, knowing one page takes me X number of minutes, so therefore I need 4 pages for this one.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm a Toastmasters member as well, so always good to chat with another. And I highly recommend, for anybody who's interested in, getting just opportunities to be able to speak in front of a group, get constructive feedback, and have a curriculum you can go through that really builds on those skills. It's a very reasonable cost associated with it, and it's a program that's helped out a lot of people. So, highly recommend the Toastmasters program. Toastmasters.org is the
website. And there's probably dozens of clubs near you. That meet at various times of the day for various interests. There's clubs for old people, clubs for working professionals, clubs for students. You can find one, and it's definitely the most affordable way to improve your public speaking skills and your confidence too.
Yeah.
And also, your ability to give feedback, because along with speaking, you're going to be evaluating your fellow speakers, and helps you think on your feet with the table topics. So highly recommend that, especially if you feel like I really would like to get out there, but I'm just scared to do that.
Yeah, for me, actually, one of the things that I get the most out of Toastmasters isn't necessarily the speaking side of it. I've been fortunate where I've had some speaking skills I've built over the years without, kind of previous to Toastmasters, but kind of focusing in on how I listen, what I'm listening to, and what I'm kind of what I'm getting out of that, because a number of the different roles that you end up, kind of taking throughout a meeting involve actively listening. And you can't just be thinking about what it is that you're going to say, because there are other things going on too. So,
what about when you're delivering the presentation? What's your strategy for making sure you're giving eye contact proportionately across the room? That's one thing I find I have frequently done wrong, and also sometimes you have somebody who only looks at one side of the room or doesn't look at anybody. That's the worst, or is always staring at that one person. What do you found? Because you're pretty good at that. I when I've seen you speak, you're very effective at devoting your gaze across the audience, so everybody feels like you're engaging with them.
Yeah, so I there's not like a specific trick or technique that I use for it, but I think about as I'm giving a presentation, I want to try to connect with people and deliver a message that I actually care about as I'm going through this. And the best way to figure that out is by making eye contact. If you make eye contact with people at different points around the room to try to get a sense for, am I landing this? Are they getting it? It not only gives me the feedback that I'm looking for, but also makes them feel more engaged. So, maybe if I kind of play that back, it's that interest in making sure that I'm being relevant that is, cueing me to look up. And I guess the other piece of it is, the fact that I'm going from bullet points, and I'll often use I'll have some crib notes of specific things that I want to say or that kind of thing from the original list that I had. And what I'll do is I'll have maybe the first 3 or 4 words out of a sentence written out verbatim. I'll kind of use those 4 as my takeoff, which I know what I'm going to be talking about. I know how I'm going to be starting this, but I'm not concerned about following a specific script. I can look up and engage with somebody while I'm, saying, whatever stanza of content that I'm going to, and then I'll glance down before I get to the next one to pick up, okay, what are those next, 4 words going to be of the next section that I'm going to, so it's not something that is, really rehearsed or specifically planned out, but that's kind of how it ends up coming together for me.
Right. And just some other miscellaneous tips is if you don't have a clock in the room, maybe put your phone, turn the clock with the big numbers on and put it where you can see it, and just have certain points that I know by point 3, I need to be there by 10:30. Otherwise, we're not going to finish. Yeah. And that way too you can have maybe prioritize the sections or the content you have based on the value you perceive your audience is going to get from it. So you have things that you can shorten or cut out. If somebody starts asking questions and you're getting good feedback, you don't want to shorten that because you got to get through the content, but you want to make sure that you have in your mind, these are the most important things. And so if I need to cut this other thing about this minor topic out, I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that makes total sense. Here's a question for you, and it's one that has the potential to throw some of those time estimates way off, which is including some sort of live demonstration of a thing during your presentation rather than just using slideware. What's your perspective on that?
I think live is always better if you can pull it off. Slideware, I've seen some people do it well, but usually you can tell that it's not really live and it's just not as rich and interactive. Or somebody will ask a question, so show me how to do this, and my pre-canned demo doesn't do that. So I think that's good. I think there's a couple things you can do to make that work better. The biggest thing is make sure you test it in the room with the internet connection and the projector you're going to be using. Worst case is you get in there and the resolution is way lower than what your laptop is. That stuff is stuff you should always catch before you have that. Get to the room early enough to call the AV guy. Mm-hmm. The AV guy is usually this bald guy with a really long beard. I don't know why, but it usually is. So call the bald guy with the long beard if you can't connect or if the resolution is bad. Having your emergency kit of dongles is helpful these days because you can never be sure what kind, whether it's HDMI, VGA, mini, HD, MI, whatever you call those things, those kind of things, and making sure you have a good internet connection. If you're at a hotel for a conference or a sales demonstration, you can't be sure that you're going to have a good internet connection. So that's why having backup. So maybe the answer is both. Having slideware, and I know some of the pre-sale superstars like you have a slideware backup they can go to if they need to, just in case they get to the hotel and there's no internet, but they have a live demo as their preferred way of going.
Yeah. I mean, so I agree on the live demo hitting more with people. A couple of things that I do for that. You mentioned having the deck as the backup or the screenshots as a backup for in case things get sideways. A really straightforward way of pulling that together is I do kind of record what I'm doing in a dry run with just Snagit in the background, and I'll grab individual frames out of that later on after I've kind of gone through my dry run. And even if I pause, screw something up, have to go back and change it again, I have all of the underlying screenshots that I need to be able to put together that backup deck. And at that point, the heavy lifting of it is already done. If it's the compelling kind of scenarios are there, it's not creating too much extra work to have the slide deck part of it there.
Right.
The other thing is, when you're considering having live demonstration, kind of ask yourself what parts of the live demonstration are worth kind of going through, and what should you already have teed up in the background. Sometimes that concept of having the magic of television, where you put something into one oven and then magically in the other oven, here's the one that's already been baked. Some of those same kind of things where you're switching to, say, a different tab rather than navigating through, 3 or 4 different screens to get somewhere. Those kind of things can really, be a place where, you get lost in the menu. You're not seeing it because you're looking back at the projector versus what's on your screen, or it's tough to see for some reason, or it's not cooperating. If you have those kind of tabs built out before your presentation, and you can just kind of click to the next one for the next little section, it can be a nice little time saver.
Right. And I try and use the multiple browsers for my advantage there, where I'm going to show dynamics in one, or maybe you're showing the same system in the context of 3 different users, customer service manager, customer service rep, salesman, or whatever. Mm-hmm. I'll have Chrome. One of them is Chrome, one of them is Firefox, and one of them is Edge. Mm-hmm. And that way I can easily point to the one I want. Sometimes that's easier than fumbling between multiple tabs.
Yeah. And, similar to that, Chrome actually has a function where you can have different profiles logged in to separately running instances of the browser. Part of the drawback of it taking up so much more memory, but you can have those kind of separate personas sitting behind each one, and there's another little, icon at the top of the screen there, so you know which one you're actually logged in as.
So, a question for you. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to make PowerPoint not automatically go into presentation mode when you share your or not go into the whatever you call
presenter
that screen, presenter view?
Yeah. So in PowerPoint, and this is as of, I forget what version it was actually introduced in, but certainly anything current within the last few years. When you have the slide deck open, up at the top there is a ribbon tab called Slideshow. And if you go onto that, there's a checkbox for Use Presenter View. If you have that unchecked before you actually start presenting your slideshow, it will not try to use Presenter View.
Nice. Yeah. Because I was in a meeting yesterday where we were in a room, but some people were remote, so I had to share my screen as well as present. And going into presenter mode, of course, the people on the web meeting saw the presenter view.
Ah, got it.
So
they saw your secret notes.
It off. Yeah. Yeah, so that's good. The other thing is, and shout out to Gus Gonzalez, who did his 2-minute Tuesday video about that this week. Turning on presenter mode on your in Windows is a good thing, so you don't get those announcements, notifications. Yeah. Yep. Although that doesn't stop all of them. If you have Skype for Business running, those will still pop up, as I learned yesterday. I can't forget the CRMEG Summit where I didn't do that, and Scott Sewell was in the audience, and he started tweeting me during the presentation about what a great guy I was.
Yeah. And he was so right too, right, Joel? Now, how much did you pay him to do that?
I paid him back in his next session. So yes, that's good. So if you aren't presenting, just wrap this topic up, or if you're nervous about public speaking, join your local Toastmasters club. Start small. Don't just jump into the big conference. Start small. Go to a local user group meeting. Speaking at Toastmasters is good. Speaking about variety of topics, even if you are, say, a solution architect, get comfortable talking about giving a persuasive speech or giving a different types of speeches, and you'll be able to apply that. You may find yourself speaking in non-work or non-technical topics as well.
Yeah, and frankly, just the going through that several times, even if you're not going to do it regularly, you start to have an appreciation for the people that are at the conference and maybe seem a little bit boring, but maybe go easy on them a little bit because, hey, they're up there taking that to go, actually do a presentation on something, and it makes it a little easier to empathize.
Yeah, definitely. So the next topic, we talked a while back about how to read nonfiction books, which we got several comments from that episode. But what about fiction books? Do you read fiction and nonfiction? What do you normally read?
Yeah, so I read quite a bit of fiction, at least by my own definition. That for me is I'm reading at least one fiction book a month.
Okay.
Sometimes more than that. For me, that's a fun little plain time one, and I really appreciate that time to kind of escape with some fiction rather than typical nonfiction books. How about you?
I think some people think, and it's easy to get this way, if you work especially in business, you feel like, oh, I should be reading the typical book you see sold at a newsstand at the airport, which is typically about some tips for success, or we talked about 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's some really good books on the nonfiction side, or biographies of people.
Yeah,
things like that. Those can be helpful, but I found for a while that was all I was reading, and for one thing, those books start sounding very repetitive after a while. And I read like 3 books in a row that all told the same story. And it was a good story. It was about this guy who, is about persuasion, and it was about this guy sent 150 people Christmas cards he didn't know, and half the people sent back. So the principle of reciprocity. But 3 books about it is enough for me. So, so I've been trying to not only read more this year, but also broaden out into other parts of other genres of literature that I haven't been so fastidious about reading. Fiction, even maybe poetry, philosophy, other types of literature beyond just nonfiction and biographies.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like there's a certain amount of using both halves of your brain in reading different types of fiction that you just don't get if you're purely reading nonfiction. There's an element of creativity and kind of a curiosity that can come with that, in just kind of following a simple mystery along and trying to figure out what's going on and who's doing what and how this is all going to come together at the end, and kind of what's going to happen. It's those kind of things that even though it's not a formal program that you're going through, it helps keep you sharp and looking for the little things, the message behind the message, the clues that are left out and around, that if you're looking for them, they're out there and you can find them. And I find that same kind of thing can apply to conversations within my job as well. So while it's not formal, be better at business, it does actually end up helping with that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you're right. The 2 parts of the brain where reading nonfiction is the logical, factual side of your brain, and you can learn things that help you be more effective in your job. But fiction is creativity, but also empathy. You can, by a good fiction story connects to you on an emotional level that a nonfiction book rarely can. And with that, the the vignettes or whatever in the story and the characters and seeing how they act and react can sometimes have a deeper emotional message than if it was just a plain, straightforward nonfiction story. So I find that in some ways it's more memorable, and a book that has, okay, so for example, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, which is a classic classic fiction book, kind of a dystopian fiction book. Compared, if he wrote a straightforward book about censorship versus the story that's a very engrossing story, the approach taking that through fiction and science fiction or fantasy as well is more effective sometimes than if you just wrote a straightforward nonfiction book about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then kind of going a little bit different direction too. For me, sometimes, if I read too much, nonfiction, I feel like my presentations that I give end up getting more boring and getting more business speaky, if that's a word. And the stories that you get and just remembering like how to have a compelling kind of exciting block of exposition or action that's going on. This is very relatable, especially in like a sales scenario of going in and trying to paint this picture of a better future that people are going to have. People care a lot more about the one with the suspense and the mystery and the excitement versus the one where it's a series of logical bullet points supported by some anecdotes and a lot of extra pages being filled.
Right. So I think as somebody who had gone several years without really reading fiction to now doing more of it, I think there's a couple of reasons why people might not read fiction or might not initially enjoy it. One is you got to read it a little bit differently. And if you read, let's say, Frank Herbert's Dune, if you read that book the way you'd read a nonfiction book, you will get hung up at all these different names. It's like, it feels like there's all these people and creatures being introduced all the time. Mm-hmm. It's like, who's that guy? What are they for? It's kind of like you've got to, for me, I've got to set that aside and just kind of go with the flow. And I might not pick up who everybody is, but over time I learn it, and it makes sense as you go along. Where if you get hung up on every name you get and have to like look back and who was that again and read it that way, you're not gonna. It's not enjoyable.
Yeah.
So I kind of have to like fight that urge and just plow forward at the pace which the author moves. And sometimes it's intentional to overwhelm you with how many characters that there are. The other thing that you might say is, I don't know where to start. There's a lot of different types of fiction. So what I did is I started with a lot of the great books. That's where I read Dune and other books like that. And from there, make connections, either who inspired this author or who was inspired by them. And as you read this, you'll pick up these connections, and one book will lead to another. And before long, you'll identify what you like, you'll identify what you don't like, and try and push yourself a little bit past your comfort zone. So don't just stick with the Stephen King and the popular type fiction. Go a little bit deeper than that. Some mindless fiction is okay too, but you don't just want to be reading the legal thriller du jour. Try and go a little bit deeper. Start with some of the and there's a lot of different, like PBS had the Great Reads, which is like they took a poll and have the 100 favorite books of America, supposedly. There's some really good books on that list. Just start somewhere and then push yourself from there.
Yeah, and I use a website called Goodreads, which gives a lot of recommendations for things you might like based on other things that you've read. There's you can kind of give a rating and review to different books that you've read them, keep track of books that you want to read. They got bought out by Amazon a few years back, but it's just goodreads.com. And that's been a good one for trying to keep that list. And also just asking people, what do you read for fun? And some people come back with business books, and that's fine. Other traditional nonfiction. But other people will come back with things that you may have never seen or heard of before, but sound really compelling. And hey, if it was good for them, it might be good for you. So I've got kind of a running list of things that have been recommended by different people, and then I'll try to circle back with them after I read it and said, hey, that was actually pretty dang good.
Yeah, definitely. I use Goodreads too, and you'll also see recommendations from your friends if you follow people on Goodreads, and there can be some good recommendations from there too.
Yeah.
So good. So go broaden your horizons and read some nonfiction.
Well, I guess to close that thought for me, I just gave up on reading a book. I've tried starting it twice in the last 2 weeks. Get about 30 pages in, and it's just not grabbing me, not compelling.
And what book was that?
The Vanished Man.
Okay.
It is a kind of a detective mystery thing that has an element of a illusionist or magician that's in it, and it's just not that interesting. Maybe my background in knowing some magic works against me, but I just
Matthew does not recommend The Vanishing Man.
The Vanished Man. No, I don't. And if anyone's interested in some book recommendations, hit me up on Twitter at MC Anderson, and I'll be happy to oblige.
And having kids is also a good way to discover books, because you can go back and read books you should have read when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Like I recently read L. Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz, like the book, and I never read it. And it's better than the movie, put it that way. The Land of Oz is much bigger than in the book than in the movie. But the second book gets kind of weird. Jack Pumpkinhead was not the apex of L. Frank Baum's creative endeavors.
I haven't read that one.
It's a weird story. It includes an army of women who take over the Emerald City.
Oh, okay then. Well, on that happy note.
Exactly. So I believe you had some updates on some productivity tools.
Well, I wanted to do a couple of checkbacks on apps that we've talked about. I talked recently about trying to switch over, use the Google Podcast app. Official update to that review is I don't recommend the Google Podcast app. Just cuts too many features down. It's the finding things that I haven't listened to yet is it's too complicated. The lack of a download manager, the lack of playlists, nothing actually seems to be coming. Throws odd errors out there, and its insistence to even if I have 10 things downloaded, play the next episode serially in whatever podcast I had just listened to rather than something else I'd downloaded. It's just can't walk away fast enough at this point. So
I've actually pretty much gone to either Stitcher or Spotify and not download them at all. Mm-hmm. I just have some that I follow or subscribe to in Spotify, and I just play them either in Spotify on my computer or Spotify on my phone.
Yep.
And I understand they don't have every podcast out there, but I don't, believe it or not, I don't listen to that many podcasts. So, but the few I do, I like that. And that way I don't have to do it, make sure I download it. The important thing is before you get on a flight that doesn't have Wi-Fi, making sure you download something.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's where having the ability to download is good.
Yep. And then one other app that we've talked about here is the Edge browser on Android. And I have a question for you, Joel.
Yeah.
Have you used anything where you add a page to your home screen, so you kind of have that quick link to it directly from your launcher into that specific website?
I have done that a little bit. I've got the site for thestrenuouslife.com that I have on there that I launched. Yeah.
So here's where I'm confused and haven't been able to find anything, and my attempts to search for it have been thwarted with non-answers. Is when you do that, how do you actually remove something from the quick launch, like long press menu on the Edge app after the fact? I guess you may or may not know. If anyone out there in podcast listening land knows, please let me know. Because as far as I can tell, removing the link from your home screen doesn't remove it from the quick links in your long press.
I don't know. I don't use long press quick links, so maybe that's something I should discover.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I use the long press on the browser to be able to quickly go to an incognito browser, for those random things that I want to search for, but I don't want to get ads for whatever that thing is all the time. It's a really quick way to get into incognito, and now I have these, these websites that are... I wanted to have a link on my homepage, but I don't need to have it every time I open a browser. And especially one of them, what really clued me into it was for a friend's blog. I thought I was adding that blog to my home screen. Instead, I was in a specific post, so it added it as a direct link into that post, which I realized after a few days, but then I went to, update and do a different one. There's no way to seemingly update that link in the quick menu. And now I have two links of the exact same thing, or, exact same blog. One just goes to a specific post, and I can't get rid of that one. So very, very odd. I mean, not the end of the world, first world problems, but definitely a curious one.
Yeah, no, I haven't done that. One thing I find it's easy in Edge on Android is when I go to the address bar, if you don't hit it right, it goes to the list of tabs. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen that? I think if you click on it one way, it goes to you just want to type an address in there. You click on it just the wrong place, it pulls up the tabs. I haven't seen that I've run into that specifically. I mean, I definitely know that list of tabs screen because I use it regularly. I have probably too many tabs open. I have more tabs open in my mobile phone than I do on my typical desktop. So that probably says something about me. But no, I haven't had it kind of accidentally go in there. Yeah. And one tool update on my part is that Microsoft To Do, which is my go-to task manager, has, I don't know when this was added, but I just saw something today, so it's new to me. They now work with Microsoft Flow, like Wunderlist has. So
that's great.
If you have flows that create tasks, although the things that I use that for with Wunderlist, I really haven't had a need to, because the fact it connects automatically to Exchange, anything you do that creates an Exchange task will show up in To Do. Now, the one thing you can do with the flow that you can't do just with creating an Exchange task is you can set the list it goes to as well.
Sure. Yeah, and I could imagine, the usage of that flow connector to create yourself those to-do items from other stuff you're doing in other connected apps. So it's more the target rather than the source that you're monitoring.
Yeah, so one that was somebody posted on LinkedIn was a certain email from somebody with a certain word in it automatically create a task for me. I'm just saying you could without a to-do connector, you could just create an Exchange task, and that would show up in to-do, because if your to-do is on the same Office 365 as your Exchange, you create a task in Exchange, it automatically your to-do tasks are in Exchange.
Got it. Well, I'm always excited to see the growing list of out-of-the-box connectors for Flow. That's the underlying exciting thing for me.
Yep, for sure. So, okay. Well, this is a good episode, so go make a speech, read a nonfiction book, maybe read a nonfiction book and then make a speech about it, and then check out your productivity tools.
Sounds good, and keep working on that mission statement.
All right, thanks. Stay productive, Matthew.
Yeah, you too.
This has been ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio with Matthew C. Anderson and Joel Lindstrom. Follow Matthew on Twitter at @MCAnderson or on his blog, connectingthedata.com. Follow Joel Lindstrom on Twitter at Joel Lindstrom. ProdCast and the rest of the CRM audio network are available on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and anywhere else fine podcasts are available. This podcast is a production of Dynamic Podcasts, LLC.